Hello. All right. Not sure what I expected, but this is amazing. Thank you all for being here. Yeah. Okay, so yeah, this is our panel today. This is Katamari, Bemani, and the sound of Shibuya-kei in 2000's Japanese games. My name is William Lampkin. I'm a musician, audio engineer. I'm also a music professor for a couple different universities, primarily on the recording, production side of things, but I love all kinds of different music stuff. I'm a huge nerd for game music in particular, so really excited to give you this presentation today. And I'm joined today by my friend Michael Klinberg.
Hi guys, I'm Michael Klinberg. I am a violinist and a middle school strings teacher. I also perform with the Videri String Quartet, and I am their outreach and education coordinator. So I create projects where I create projects where I take the Videri String Quartet to middle schools and high schools and have them work with different students to perform video game music and experience the world beyond, which is this world right here. So we want kids to know that they have a space where they can be themselves after they leave high school and come do lots of video game stuff. So also I wanted to give a quick shout out to my friend William here, who is actually having his first MAGFest experience. So can we give him a big holler for that?
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, thank you so much. I mean, this is the greatest welcome I could have, having a whole packed room.
Yeah, I'm a terminal MAGFest goer, so I've been here forever, and I also panel a lot. I did a Bayonetta panel last year, but I'm here for emotional support. But also, how many of you have played Katamari before? Woo! Okay,
wow.
That's what I thought. And we have a prince in the back, so we are very excited to have him joining us. You can see the top, right? So you'll definitely understand the reference when I ask you to believe in us for a cumulative 50 or so minutes. So thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you.
Pass
thank
it
you
back.
So much. Yeah, so what our panel is today, basically what we're going to be going over. So we are definitely going to be talking about Katamari, but the other side of the equation is this very interesting and cool subcultural movement in Japan called Shibuya-kei. And we're going to be talking about how this movement influenced lots of games in the early 2000s in Japan, and how they actually had this cross-pollination of ideas from one side to the other, and we'll actually be talking about the different artists and composers who were responsible for these connections. But yeah, we're going to be starting off with Katamari, and I wanted to start off with actually highlighting how last year, 2025, was actually a huge year for the Katamari franchise and for anybody who is a Katamari fan. So we had 2 new Katamari games. We had Katamari Damacy Rolling Live, which came out in April last year. It did come out on Apple Arcade, so I actually don't know a single person who's played it. But more recently, and probably more prominently, the flagship new Katamari game that came out was Once Upon a Katamari. That came out in October. That was on consoles, and I believe it's on Steam as well. And not exactly in the Katamari franchise, but if you're a fan of Katamari, you might know the creator, Keita Takahashi, and his latest game, To a T, also came out in May of last year. So a lot of super cool things for Katamari fans. Now, this is the part where I reveal I'm kind of a fake fan, at least in terms of the recent releases, because I have not played a single one of these yet. I did buy Once Upon a Katamari, but I haven't had the chance to play it yet. Michael has, though.
Yeah, how many of you have played the newest Katamari, Once Upon a Katamari? Okay, yeah, that's awesome. So it's really great, and I definitely recommend it. It has a completely different vibe, and one of the things we'll talk about today is that musical tonal shift that happens between newer Katamari games and older Katamari games, because you've probably experienced that the music is composed in a very different way. It highlights different artists and different instrumental styles and timbres and textures that have always spanned quite a wide, diverse range in Katamari in recent past. So we will talk about the difference in both of those games, as I'm sure you've heard some of those tracks before. So,
for sure, yeah. So we're going to be going back to the first Katamari game to start off with. The original PlayStation 2 game from 2004, Katamari Damacy, the one that started it all. And since we're talking about the music, one of the first things that I wanted to talk about was just breaking the soundtrack down and trying to figure out what makes it so special or what makes it so well regarded. The Katamari soundtrack, at least in my opinion, is definitely one of the best video game soundtracks of all time. I guess some of you all would agree. Yeah. It's definitely very highly regarded. I see it a lot in these editorial best game soundtracks of all time lists. I know on like the internet review site, Rate Your Music, the official soundtrack is one of the highest rated user-reviewed game soundtracks. So it has such a large cult following. I know a lot of people who haven't even played the games, they love the music to Katamari. It's very iconic. But I do think there are a couple of reasons why the Katamari soundtrack became so popular to begin with, or what makes it stand out in terms of game music from other games from its time period, but also just in general. So one of the big things that I think makes Katamari different is the prevalence of vocal tracks on the soundtrack. That's, even today, very uncommon for video games, outside of rhythm games, of course, which we will be talking about as well. But in terms of action games, you rarely ever hear like vocal tracks. Maybe they're going to be used for like cinematic scenes or for opening movies or cutscenes, but most soundtrack work is going to be filling in the background, serving as like an emotional layer or just to create an aesthetic or vibe, which of course Katamari does as well, but a lot of the tracks are actual songs. These are performed by actual artists, like performers. There's a song structure to these, and if you listen to the soundtrack, you can just put that on as an album, which is really fun. I definitely put it on car rides all the time. So that is a huge thing about Katamari, and that is something that definitely exists in the Katamari franchise today still. But there's a couple other like more conceptual things that I think are interesting about the Katamari soundtrack. And one of those is this concept of retrofuturism. So if you actually look at the credits of the Katamari soundtrack, what's really interesting about them is that they have a lot of older artists working on these individual songs. So we'll talk about the sound director for the game, Shibuya-kei, soon, but one of his approaches to creating the overall sound for the game was to approach artists that weren't in the charts recently, like from older genres or from older scenes, and then juxtaposing that with new styles, like new technologies. There's definitely like a lot of electronic music that or even like glitchy sort of sounds, but on the same soundtrack you have artists that were popular like in the 70s or 80s and hadn't actually released music in a long time. One of those is The Moon and the Prince. So this track, which I'll play just a couple seconds from, is performed by Kinji Ninuma, who was an Inca vocalist that was popular in the 70s. Inca being a type of like Japanese emotional ballad, but as you'll hear in this song, it doesn't sound anything like that. So here we go. 'll skip forward just a little bit so we get the idea. ファンキーだみんな必死で俺についてこいカモンチゲだファンキーだみんな黙って俺についてこいイエチゲだファンキーだみんな必死で俺についてこいカモンチゲだフ
ファンキーだみんな黙って俺についてこい
Yeah, so I mean, just like hearing the beat, like the soundtrack or like the backing track, super like contemporary to the time with these like chopped samples and stuff like that. But then you have this like old like 70s ballad singer rapping on top of that. So that happens a lot in Katamari music. We also have this international influence that's prevalent all across the soundtrack. So even on the first game, we have music, like a lot of like Latin American influenced songs. There is like a mambo on the soundtrack. This track I have here is called Last Samba and is, plays it pretty straight as taking influence from samba music. So let me play a couple seconds of that as well. Pause it there. I mean, we could listen to the soundtrack all day, but I do want to get through. We have a lot of ideas to address. So yeah, the fact that we have, even just between these two tracks we listen to, such diverse styles is amazing, right? I like to describe it as maximalist, or this like approach to genres and the mix of them on the soundtrack. Just being able to jump from style to style, from like cultural influence to cultural influence. It feels like anything can happen on the soundtrack, which makes it exciting to play and listen to. Another one, this is, I think, like also a very well-known song from Katamari, and I couldn't give this presentation without at least playing a bit of it. This is Lonely Rolling Star, and this one actually has like a chiptune sound, and which is pretty cool because a lot of the music, and also the creator himself, Keita Takahashi, was influenced or trying to harken back to older like Namco games as a Namco developed game. So we do hear influence from older game soundtracks in the OST as well. So here is Lonely Rolling Star. I hate to cut it off, but I love that song so much. Yeah.
Yeah, I also wanted to add part of the maximalist, diverse stylistic approach is really synonymous with genres that identify with camp, if you're familiar with that kind of thing. A lot of video games have been analyzed that way, like Resident Evil 4, like Leon's quips being so atonal with what the game actually is supposed to represent. Bayonetta, similarly, just so many diverse styles converging in one experience, and Katamari is very much aligned with that. And the original statement that kind of codified camp was that it was a representation of style as something beyond what is naturally considered realistic or normal or functional. So like in real life, that's high fashion, or like lamps that look like mushrooms and some random stuff. And so Katamari kind of, because that's crazy, right? But Katamari kind of goes in that same direction where it says, well, you might understand what a video game soundtrack or a soundtrack should look like, but we're going to turn that on its head and do something where every song is going to be a completely different experience, and you're always going to be looking for what's next, what's next, what's next. And that's another unique aspect of all of these tracks you've just heard, is that it's also pretty campy at the same time.
Yeah, for sure. I think like another word I'd use is like kitsch, or kind of deliberately
Yeah.
trying to like play with these like almost like over the top sounds and ideas. So we mentioned Yu Miyake, the sound director for Katamari Damacy, but to get some context for some of these decisions or these things we've identified from the Katamari soundtrack, I thought it'd be a good idea to read some quotes from him. And I think it's always a good thing to do when trying to study something that you love, is go to the people that actually made it and see what they have to say about it. So Miyake was a house composer for Namco, and he shared a lot of vision with Keita Takahashi, the creator, and he had a lot of strong ideas for what the soundtrack could be like. He wanted to push it to be something that wasn't being made at that time in the video game industry. So I'll read the first quote, then Michael, you can read the second quote. So this is from an interview with VGMO by Chris Greening in 2012. Miyake said, "I wanted to have something like the iconic music of the past, where just hearing it brought back memories of the game and made you want to play it again. In corporate language, I suppose you could call it a selling point."
He also said, around that time, an idea had come up in conversations between Keita Takahashi and myself that the absolute best way to undertake creative work is to deny the present. You could call it a dialectical approach. I think that was why we arrived at the concept of an all-vocal score.
Yeah, so when he's talking about like referring to the past, like I mentioned, he's talking about like older video game music, which the soundtracks of those games, because they had much less room to include songs or less detail in the games in general, such as on like NES or SNES games, they had to rely on the melodies or what they could bring out of the scene just from the music itself. And he wanted the music to be memorable, to be an actual focus of the game Katamari, and not just something that sits in the background while you play it. So I think the approach to doing an all-vocal score definitely worked out. I think he achieved what he was going for there. So we're talking about Katamari, but what about this other side of the title of this panel, Shibuya-kei? Let's bridge the gap there. So to do that, I want to first define what Shibuya-kei is, if you're not familiar. Well, I guess, first of all, is anybody here like a fan of Shibuya-kei music? Wow, okay, awesome. Yeah, I'm a huge fan. I've been like a lifelong listener. I would love to talk with anybody like after the panel about like favorite artists or anything. I'll definitely be showing off some of my own here later. But if you're not familiar, Shibuya-kei, as I mentioned at the beginning, is a subcultural movement in Japan that lasted from roughly the late 80s to the late 90s. And it often gets used online to refer to like a quote-unquote genre of music, but I think that's not quite accurate. And as we listen to some different artists, you can hear how it's hard to actually pin down like a style in Shibuya-kei. What I really think it is, and what you'll hear a lot of like cultural commentators and researchers talk about it as, is more so the movement in itself, the youth subculture that emerged in Shibuya, which is a ward in Tokyo, Japan, at that time, like around like the bubble era and lasting into the turn of the millennium. It was actually coined after the fact, or after it had already started, by a curator in a record shop called HMV Shibuya to describe the kind of chic, trendy, aesthetic-oriented things that were being made by like youth artists at the time. So the aesthetic and ideas are more, to me, what define Shibuya-kei. And here, like, these are some of the things that I do think define the genre. One of those is that it's, or the movement, one of those is that it's postmodern. meaning that it consciously refers back to art from the past, taking things from lots of different time periods and older genres, especially from the 60s, and flattens those into like a melting pot, and often turning them up into like more extreme versions of themselves. And through that, it's like a patchwork pastiche of these older styles. It kind of like a lot of these artists remix all of these old cultural ideas and create something new out of them, while also paying homage to them. And it also takes a lot of influence from international cultures and music movements. So a lot of these younger people, especially in the bubble era at the time, were well off. You know, those that were buying things and shopping in Shibuya all the time. So there were Shibuya as a cultural center in Japan had a lot of shops that focused on imported goods, especially like the record shops had lots of imported records from all around the world, America, Europe, Latin America. So these music nerds, they would buy up all these records and start making their own music, trying to mimic these things. And that is a big part of how Shibuya-kei started. In a lot of ways, it is music by music nerds for music nerds. They're trying to show off their taste, or how cultured they are in a way. So one of the pioneering members of the Shibuya-kei movement is a group called Flipper's Guitar. Yeah, we got some fans in the room. They were active actually for a pretty short time period, from around 1987 to 1991. And they had a couple different members over the course of their time as a band, but by the end, and like what they were primarily remembered for, was the two members, Keigo Oyamada and Kenji Ozawa. They were influential in popularizing the alternative music coming out in US and Europe. They even had a radio show that they DJ'd trying to highlight these artists and bring them out to a Japanese audience. And one of those, or one specific area that they were definitely massive fans of was 80s UK guitar pop, which is also referred to in Japan a lot of the times as neo-acoustic music. So this referential or this postmodern like homage thing is baked into Flipper's Guitar like from the beginning of them as a concept. Flipper's Guitar, the name of the band, is a reference to a cover from the jingle pop group Orange Juice. They had a dolphin on one of the covers. And Flipper's Guitar's first album was also named Three Cheers for Our Side, which is a well-known song from Orange Juice as well. So everything they did was transparent. Like, they weren't afraid of hiding the fact that they were homaging these artists. They were trying to prove or show how cool they were just by knowing this alternative group on the other side of the world. So I have a song from them I'm gonna play. This is one of their singles called Camera, Camera, Camera. This came out in 1990. Yeah, so you can kind of get an idea of this kind of things that they were influenced by, like that 80s guitar pop sound. So they they definitely started off with this sound, but what was really interesting about them is that they very quickly shifted styles and were picking up new things and new technologies that changed their style or like their music entirely. One of those is that they got a sampler and they started just all these musicians that they were big fans of, and instead of just mimicking them songwriting wise, they were actually just taking samples from their music without clearing licenses and kind of doing like a hodgepodge approach to composition that way. Their last album, Dr. Head's World Tower, came out in 1991, is full of this, and you actually can't even listen to it on streaming because I believe they don't have, they just haven't been able to get the licenses for those samples. So I'll play the beginning of this song, Dolphin Song, from their last album, and you might be able to recognize at least one of the samples from here. I'll skip forward just a little bit.
Acknowledges a king higher than you.
But you are the Messiah. Our ship better be sailing out of that harbor on its way home within 24 hours or we're coming in. Sounds like a lot of supernatural balloons.
Yeah, so there was a clip from God Only Knows by the Beach Boys in there, which they were a big fan of, and then a Strawberry Switchblade song called Trees and Flowers was that last little bit in there too. So sampling, like just the fact they had this new technology, that totally opened up the doors to this like pastiche postmodern idea. The fact that they could work with the material of these things that they were so in love with directly, that became like a guiding force for these people involved in the scene. A couple of other well-known members of the Shibuya-kei movement. There is a group called Pizzicato 5. Yeah.
Yeah. So Pizzicato 5 was another extremely influential act in the Shibuya-kei movement, and Roommania especially seen them as a strong fashion influence in the scene, and they took on more inspiration from lounge music, Latin and French music. And one thing that really stood out to me listening to, because I'm newer to the genre in general and was listening to a lot of the artists that William was recommending me over the last year and a half. And one of the things that stood out to me instantly about Pizzicato 5, again, from a perspective of listening to Shibuya-kei music where you haven't had a whole presentation about it and you're just kind of experiencing it for the first time, unlike you guys who will be so much more intellectual about it after this, is just listening to those inspirations. And Pizzicato 5 stood out to me instantly as a group that was taking influence from way more international scenes than just the one traditional English rock scene that we just talked about. So I was hearing samples of Baroque classical style in some of their composition. I was seeing samples from R&B and pop grooves that we would traditionally ascribe to the West, like the US. And I was seeing traditions of French acoustic music. There was just so much variety, and it kept me coming back to listen for more. You can add more to that if you want.
Yeah, for sure. I think they were also like similar to Flipper's Guitar in that they were trying to be curators themselves. Konishi, the producer behind the group, was also a DJ and was also trying to bring all these sounds into the Japanese music scene through groups like Pizzicato 5 or through their own record label that was named Ready Made. And here is we'll play a short clip from one of their songs called Sweet Soul Review. Came out in 1993. I'll skip forward. And you can see like in the video, and part of the reason I included the video is that they were so fashion forward. I haven't been able to find a video of it myself, but there are definitely records of sometimes during their shows they would just decide to make it a fashion show, and Nomiya would just walk out there and just show off different outfits and stuff. So she was an icon in the scene, super influential. And on the other side of things was Kahimi Ikari.
Yeah, also, just looking at that video again, it looks like she would go really well with a baguette, which is very topical for for our current time. Still fashionable. So, and then, Kahimi Ikari, so she collaborated with multiple producers like Keigo Oyamada, who produced the above song that we're going to play, Momus and Tomoki Kanda. So, do you want to play the song?
Yeah. And one thing you'll hear in this track, Elastic Girl, from 1995, is that she also was like a big influence in the scene, and you'll hear she has this kind of like whispery, very high-pitched voice that wasn't very big or really wasn't really a thing in pop music before she came onto the scene. But after Kahimi Ikari, so much of the rest of the scene or like following inspired artists would take on this vocal style. So. Skip forward a little bit. Yeah. So we'll come back to both of these artists when we get back to Katamari. But I wanted to finish off talking about Shibuya-kei by talking about how it died. So, you know, all good things must come to an end. And Shibuya-kei did start winding down as a movement around the late 90s going into the new millennium. So Flipper's guitar, one of the members, Keigo Yamada, after their band broke up and they separated, he took on the solo artist moniker Cornelius. He headed a label that kind of served as a curatorial platform for the scene, propping up people he thought were cool and even producing for many of them. And as he got into sampling with that last album that we played a song from, he went further and further into exploring new tech. And especially as computers and digital audio workstations started to become a thing producers could work with, he was on the forefront of that and exploring the boundaries of what that could do. This all came to a head with his 1997 album called Phantasma, which for many in the scene at the time and even today is seen as the culmination of a lot of the ideas of this Shibuya-kei sound. It's very digital, but also blends a lot of like samples and analog sounds and does what I describe as like extreme juxtaposition, showing this like acoustic side, these roots that he has in this guitar pop with his interest in music technology and just smashing them together and making the most maximalist sound that he could come up with. So this is an iconic song from that album called Starfruit's Surf Rider, and I'll skip a little bit ahead into it. Yeah, so I had to let the chorus drop in there. The video's a little bit quiet, but there's like this crazy chopped break beat in the back there underneath all these other like guitar samples and stuff like that. So what Cornelius did here was take this idea that he was inspired by like 60s producers like the Beach Boys' Brian Wilson, using the studio as an instrument, and all these elements of production as musical characteristics in themselves, to its logical conclusion. I also like having the corner here, as he did, showing off his tastes and inspirations. On the cover for Starfruit Surf Rider, he's imitating a photo of Brian Wilson in the studio. Yeah. But after Phantasma, Cornelius actually decided to abandon this postmodern style. Like, sampling was completely gone. He just stopped doing it. He wanted to make his own original sounds. He had explored this idea entirely in Phantasma, and even to this day, he is kind of stuck with the sound from the following album, Point, which just uses like a hodgepodge approach, but from his own material. No samples, everything he recorded himself. And here is a song from that following album called Point, and the song is named Drop. That's also like a very great album that I recommend. Even if it is like in a different style, his production is so strong and so interesting to listen to, especially if you have some nice headphones. It has some crazy panning that goes back and forth that makes it super immersive. But yeah, Cornelius leaving the Shibuya-kei style was definitely a major factor that showed that the scene was ending. A lot of other artists, like Pizzicato 5, would end up breaking up by the year 2001. And many of these artists also moved out of Shibuya. And you can't really call it a scene like Shibuya-kei anymore if it's not in Shibuya. So the scene where Shibuya was the center and where all these artists were collaborating eventually faded out, at least for the time being. So yeah, that's kind of like a brief history of Shibuya-kei, and we can see how a lot of these ideas are pretty similar to what we talked about with the Katamari soundtrack, right? Like the international influence, this like homage style, and this like maximalist idea of working with all kinds of different genres. So yeah, we'll go back to talking about Katamari with the sequel to the original game, We Love Katamari, which came out the next year in 2005. So this was the last game that the original creator, Keita Takahashi, was involved in. I love this game a lot as well. And the soundtrack, I think is right up there with the original game. It has a lot of amazing collaborators on there. And what makes this one, what kind of ties it all together, is that some of these Shibuya-kei artists that we talked about are actually performers on the We Love Katamari soundtrack. So one of them is Blue Orb.
Yeah, so Blue Orb featured Kahimi Kari, which we heard earlier, who kind of popularized that higher pitched vocal sound. And that was produced and written by Tomoki Kanda. Do you want to hear that one?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and even, since this is 2005, she had already moved on from that original Shibuya-kei style too. But she was involved in the scene, so I do think it's important to include her in this.
And then the other one is Baby Universe, which was performed by Makinomiya, who was formerly a member of Pizzicato 5.
Yeah, and this one definitely you can hear that style. Like this is so Shibuya-kei. We do have to move on, unfortunately. So yeah, We Love Katamari, I think as this like hallmark of like working with like Japanese artists, I think is a good thing to, if you want to explore the artists involved with the soundtrack, look up the credits list for We Love Katamari. There's a lot of other cool artists that weren't necessarily like Shibuya-kei artists, but still very interesting artists that Miyake collaborated with on the soundtrack. So we did mention Shibuya-kei died, but even though the original members had moved on to other things, the influence of Shibuya-kei did live on through younger artists who took influence from them, and then also in different parts of the world or different wards of Tokyo. So I do want to highlight, we probably won't have time to play all of these examples, but there are a couple different threads that came off of Shibuya-kei as artists were taking influence, but in their own new directions. So going back to Flipper's guitar, their guitar pop style, a lot of the style of like melodic indie pop that they helped popularize, a lot of bands formed in that style, but not necessarily as postmodern or like referential. They just wanted to make their own songs, music that expressed themselves without quite as a meta tinge to it. And that was present in some of these groups, but this guitar pop band boom definitely took on a life of its own in like the later 90s going into the early 2000s. I know one that's been really popping off in recent years is Lamp, right? Like, you know, anybody here a fan of Lamp? Oh yeah, I saw them live I think in 2024 too. Yeah, they were playing in Chicago, which was amazing. Yeah. Oh yeah, they played in this. I forgot about that.
The crazy thing, I went to the show in Orlando a couple months ago,
Mhm.
and I'm 38, and like the audience was almost all Zoomers.
Oh yeah,
Like kids that were there with their parents.
for sure. Yeah, because they blew up on TikTok,
Yeah.
right? And so you know they have all these like millions of listeners. But I think it's really amazing that like this band that was primarily active, especially like 20 years ago, has like this second life now through going viral on streaming. Yeah. So I do have to move on, but guitar pop, definitely check out some of these artists like Lamp. Symbols is another big band. Yes. I love the Symbols as well. They're also kind of influential in this guitar pop scene. Yeah, so that's guitar pop. There is also this other subgenre called Akishibuke, which is a hybrid sound between Shibuya-kei and an otaku-oriented Akiba-kei, referring to Akihabara, which is kind of the like otaku like center of Tokyo, right? And it's like it's a tourist destination for that. But yeah, coming into the 2000s, a lot of Shibuya-kei artists or artists that were influenced by Shibuya-kei started working on like anime, video games, stuff like that, visual novels, all that kind of stuff. And we hear the sound, but with like this more like influence from like otaku or like anime music. And one of those that's pretty well known is the opening to Chobits, Let Me Be With You, which is by Round Table, which was a Shibuya-kei band, and they employed a vocalist named Nino to help sing on this song. And this kind of became like a defining sound for this Aki Shibuya-kei. So I'll just play a short clip from that. Yeah. So they did a couple other anime openings too. Another example, this is actually a video game and not an anime. There is a Dreamcast game called Roommania 203. Yeah, really weird game, super cool actually. I played it last year. Partially as like research for this. And it's hard to describe, but basically like you're kind of like a god, and you're like, you throw balls at this guy like living in his room, and you're you're trying to like subconsciously influence him to do things. Like he's kind of a loser, so you're trying to make him like live his best life or something like that. But what is really cool about this game is that the soundtrack to it is based around this fictional artist named Sarani Poji. There was this fictional pop star that he was like a huge fan of. He had a poster of on his wall. And as a promotional thing for the album, they released the soundtrack as an actual thing that you could buy. And Sarani Poji actually became a band that existed outside of the game. And they have a following outside of these games. They're probably more well known on their own instead of through Roommania. But they're super cool. And that brings me to this last post-Shibuya-kei genre called Pico Pop, also known as Future Pop, which does deliberately harken back to a lot of the ideas from Shibuya-kei, but with added influence from synth pop and 8-bit video game music. A lot of these things sound like super extreme, like going into like very fast tempos, and have like these ideas from like Cornelius, these like hodgepodge samples going like off the walls, almost to like an abrasive level. I do want to move on, so unfortunately I can't play any of these songs, but I do recommend checking out like Plus Tech Squeezebox and Sonic Coaster Pop especially, and Capsule, which is by, or one of the main people behind Capsule is Yasutaka Nakata, the producer behind like Perfume. If you're familiar with them, yeah. So that brings me to the other part of the title, which is Bemani, or in rhythm games. Okay, right? Yeah. So Bemani is Konami's rhythm game division, and especially around this time in like the late 90s, early 2000s, they had deep ties with the Shibuya-kei scene and its successors, especially in pop and music. But yeah. I'm a huge pop and music fan. But also in Beatmania and Guitar Freaks, you'll hear some examples from these. I want to highlight some of the composers or the in-house sound team members that were working in the style. One of those is Kiyotaka Sugimoto, who was a composer and sound director on some of the early pop and music games. And pop and music is really cool. If you haven't played it, it has a super diverse approach to like genres. They'll even come up with genre names that like don't exist. Some of my favorite tracks from pop and music are like Flower Pop, or like Glide. Just kind of like words, but they're evocative and cool, and I think that's a really interesting thing that pop and music does. But pop and music has this kind of like hodgepodge approach to genres, like Shibuya-kei baked into it because of that. And artists like Sugimoto could make genre or songs in genres like Shibuya-kei or influenced by them. Sugimoto, one of the aliases he would use in pop and music was Orange Noise Shortcut. One of the more iconic songs he did is Homesick Part 2 and 3, which I'll play like a really short clip from. Yeah, kind of sound just like Flipper's guitar, right? Orange Noise Shortcut, he actually ended up working as, or like releasing music independently outside of the rhythm games. So he became part of that scene himself in this new Shibuya-kei style. Another big name is Jun Wakida, or Wak, who's the director of the latest pop and music release, High Cheers. Really cool trivia is that he went to university with members of the band Symbols and was in the same music club as them, so he took a lot of influence from them going into his work with Konami. So we hear a lot of that style in his earlier songs especially, and of course he developed his work and made more diverse music later on. But he actually got a lot of he got Reiji Oki and Asako Toki from Symbols to collaborate with him on pop and music and Guitar Freaks, and like he's utilizing these connections, and I think it's cool that he is still maintaining this community through these rhythm games. And then finally, I want to talk about Tomosuke Funaki, another big one. He is well known for his work under Orange Lounge, which I've seen a lot online recently. Definitely developed a cult following on its own outside of Beatmania or anything like that. His work definitely took a lot of influence from like Latin European like lounge music, so it has a little bit more of that flavor versus like Orange Noise Shortcut's guitar pop. There are some other games that do have Shibuya-kei artists involved with them, like Gift Pia, Billy Hatcher. There's this like really funny word game called Moji Piton that has a lot of Pico Pop artists collaborating on their work. Unfortunately, we're running low on time, so I do recommend you checking these out on your own. And finally, I want to conclude with just wrapping this all up with asking, where is Shibuya-kei now? And fortunately, Shibuya-kei is kind of in a good place. Even though it has fallen out of like the mainstream, there has been like a recent revival on social media, like we talked about with Lamp blowing up on TikTok and stuff like that. There's a reappraisal of these older Shibuya-kei and neo-Shibuya-kei artists, and they've been developing cult followings. A lot of them performing again for the first time in many years, and even releasing new music. And to bring it all together, Once Upon a Katamari, which just came out, doesn't necessarily have a Shibuya-kei sound in it, but it does have a variety of like styles and genres. Michael, you had some ones you might wanted to mention.
Yeah, there's some really great tracks on there like Yang Yang, and I'm sure you guys have heard some of them and definitely explore that soundtrack. But one of the things that we were looking into with that newest game in the research is that the sound director is the same. So that same person who was reaching out and gathering these artists to collaborate with each other is still doing that same thing to create a sound that is uniquely Katamari, but at the same time each song being uniquely not like any other song on its soundtrack or like prior Katamari soundtracks. And one of the songs that we picked out that again just stands out as so completely antithetical to what you would think would happen in a Katamari game. Well, they had the San Francisco Boys Choir sing a song with electronic music and perform that as one of the songs in the newest game, and you don't get more Katamari than that, I guess.
That's true. Yeah. So I mean, this approach, like this this wide variety of genres, it's still there, and that still is Katamari. So I think that is super cool. Well, yeah, we are out of time, so that is our panel. Thank you so much for being here. And I'll probably be hanging out around outside if anybody wants to chat. I'd love to meet any of you. So yeah, thanks again.